When the young CIA analyst asked the woman in the corner to fetch coffee for the briefing table, he had no idea he was speaking to the most classified operative in United States intelligence history. By the time he realized his mistake, it would be too late to save himself from professional humiliation. My name is Elena Vance. At least, that's the name on my current identification. I've had 47 different names over the past 23 years, but in the most secure corners of the Central Intelligence Agency, I'm known by only one designation, Agent 1. It was a Tuesday morning in November when I walked into the 7th floor conference room at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. The room was already filling with senior analysts, operations officers, and intelligence coordinators. This was a priority briefing on a developing crisis in the Middle East that threatened to destabilize 3 countries and potentially draw the United States into another regional conflict. I entered quietly, carrying a simple brown leather folder, wearing a plain gray pantsuit that could have belonged to any mid-level government employee. My hair was pulled back in a practical bun. I wore minimal makeup. No jewelry except a simple watch. Nothing that would draw attention or suggest importance. I looked exactly like an administrative assistant or junior analyst. That was intentional. I found a seat in the corner of the room away from the main conference table, not at the table itself, but against the wall where support staff typically sat. I opened my folder and began reviewing documents while the room continued to fill. The conference table seated 16 people. Senior analysts were claiming the prime positions, arranging their laptops and tablets, preparing their presentations. These were the experts, the people whose intelligence assessments shaped policy decisions at the highest levels of government. They barely glanced at me. A young analyst, maybe 30 years old, sat near the head of the table, setting up his computer. His name tag identified him as Dr. Marcus Webb, Senior Intelligence Analyst, Middle East Division. He had the confidence of someone who had recently been promoted and wanted everyone to know it. He glanced up from his laptop, noticed me sitting in the corner, and without really looking at me, made an assumption. "Hey," he called out, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "Can you get coffee for the table? We've got about 10 people here, light on the sugar." Several other analysts chuckled. One of them, a woman named Patricia Chen, added helpfully, "And some of those pastries from the commissary if they have any left." "Thanks." I looked up from my folder, made eye contact with Webb, and smiled slightly. Then I returned to my reading without saying a word. Webb frowned, annoyed that I hadn't immediately jumped to fulfill his request. "Excuse me," he said, louder this time. "I asked you to get coffee." "I'm comfortable. Thank you," I replied calmly, not looking up. The room got quieter. Several analysts turned to watch the exchange. Webb's face reddened slightly. "I don't think you understand. This is a priority briefing. We need refreshments for the participants. That's your job, is it?" I asked, still reading my documents. Chen leaned over to Webb and whispered something. He nodded and turned back to me with increased irritation. "Look, I don't know who you're here supporting, but right now you're being insubordinate. Either get the coffee or leave the room." I closed my folder and looked at him directly. "I'll stay, thank you." Webb stood up, his patience exhausted. "What's your name? I'm going to report this to your supervisor. You can't just refuse a reasonable request from senior personnel." Before I could respond, another analyst, an older man named Gerald Foster, who had been with the agency for 30 years, spoke up quietly. "Webb, maybe you should wait until the director arrives before making an issue of this." Webb turned to Foster with confusion. "Why? She's clearly support staff who doesn't understand protocol." Foster looked at me, and I saw recognition in his eyes. He was one of the few people in this room with clearance high enough to know who I actually was. "Just wait," Foster repeated, his tone carrying weight. Webb looked between Foster and me, confused but sensing something he didn't understand. "Fine," he muttered, sitting back down, "but this is going in my report." I smiled slightly and reopened my folder. The room continued to fill. By 0900 hours, there were 23 people present, 16 at the main table, 7 others like me along the walls. The others against the wall were actual support staff, analysts with laptops ready to pull up reference materials, and a stenographer to record the classified discussion. At 0902, the door opened and the Deputy Director of Operations entered. Everyone started to stand, but he waved them back down. "Director Fisher will be joining us in a moment," he said. "He's just finishing a call with the National Security Advisor." The deputy director took a seat at the conference table and began reviewing his briefing materials. Webb leaned over to Chen and whispered, loudly enough for me to hear, "Did you see that woman refuse to get coffee? The entitlement is unbelievable. Support staff thinking they're too important for basic tasks." Chen glanced at me, then back at Webb. "Marcus, maybe you should drop it." "Why?" "If she doesn't want to do her job, she shouldn't be here." Foster, sitting across from them, closed his eyes briefly as if preparing for an inevitable disaster. At 0905, the door opened again. This time, everyone stood immediately. Director James Fisher entered the room. He was a man in his early 60s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent 40 years in intelligence work. He had served in the field, run operations on 5 continents, and now led one of the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world. But he didn't. Walked to the head of the conference table where a chair had been left empty for him. Instead, he walked directly across the room to where I sat in the corner. The room watched in confused silence as the director of the Central Intelligence Agency stopped in front of the woman they had assumed was an administrative assistant. Fisher looked at me with an expression of profound respect. "Agent 1, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. I know you prefer to avoid headquarters." He gestured toward the head of the conference table. "The room is yours." The silence that followed was suffocating. Every person in that room processed what they had just heard at different speeds. Foster closed his eyes and shook his head slightly, having known this was coming. Chen's mouth fell open. Webb turned a shade of white usually associated with shock or illness. I stood, picking up my folder, and walked calmly to the head of the table. Fisher pulled out the chair for me personally, then took a seat to my right. I set down my folder, looked at each person in the room, and spoke for the first time with authority. "Good morning. For those who don't know me, I'm Agent 1. I've been asked to brief you on the situation developing in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. What I'm about to tell you is classified at a level above what most of you currently hold. Director Fisher has granted temporary clearance for this briefing." I opened my folder and pulled out a series of photographs. But before we begin, I want to address something that happened before the director arrived. I looked directly at Webb. "Dr. Webb, you asked me to fetch coffee. You assumed I was support staff based on where I was sitting and how I looked. That assumption, in this room, is merely embarrassing. In the field, that kind of assumption gets people killed." Webb looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. "I'm not upset," I continued. "I'm using this as a teaching moment. In intelligence work, your ability to assess situations accurately is more important than your analytical skills. You made a snap judgment without gathering information. That's a critical failure." Webb managed to speak, his voice shaking. "Ma'am, I apologize. I had no idea who you were." "No, you didn't. And that's the point. You should have gathered more information before making assumptions and issuing orders." I looked around the room at the others. "How many of you assumed the same thing? That I was support staff, an assistant, someone beneath your notice?" Several people looked down at their desks, unable to meet my eyes. "That's understandable," I said. "It's human nature to categorize people quickly, but in our line of work, that natural tendency can be exploited. Enemy operatives count on you making assumptions based on appearance." I pulled out the first photograph and placed it on the table. This is Rashid Al-Hamdi. He runs a terrorist financing network that spans 6 countries. Last year, he was responsible for funding 3 major attacks that killed 62 people. I placed another photograph. This is Yasmin Khalil. She's a recruiter for an extremist organization. She's personally recruited 18 foreign fighters who've conducted attacks in Europe. I placed a third photograph. This is Marcus Webb. He's a senior intelligence analyst for the CIA who just asked a complete stranger to fetch coffee without verifying who she was or why she was in a classified briefing room. Webb's face went from white to red. "See how easy it is?" I said. "I just created an intelligence profile on Dr. Webb based on one interaction. I know he makes assumptions quickly. I know he's comfortable giving orders. I know he has an ego that allows him to dismiss people he perceives as beneath him." I looked at him directly. If I were an enemy operative, I would use all of that information to manipulate you. The room was absolutely silent now. Fisher spoke up. "Agent 1 is here because she has information none of you have access to. She spent the past 18 months embedded in the region we're discussing. She has ground truth that no amount of satellite imagery or signals intelligence can provide." He paused. "She's also here because I specifically requested her expertise to assess this group's analytical capabilities. She'll be providing training recommendations based on what she observes today." I let that sink in. "So, Dr. Webb," I said, returning to the young analyst, "you didn't just ask me to get coffee. You auditioned for me. And so far, your performance has been instructive." Webb looked like he wanted to die. "But," I continued, "you're young, and you can learn from this. So pay attention during this briefing. See if you can identify the other assumptions you've made that might be wrong." I picked up the photographs. Now, let's discuss why 3 countries are about to descend into chaos and what we can do to prevent it. As I began the actual briefing, I could see everyone in the room reassessing their initial assumptions about who I was and what I represented. They were learning the first lesson about Agent 1, that I was always there, always watching, always assessing, and that the most important intelligence officer in the room was often the one nobody noticed. I placed a map of the Middle East on the large screen at the front of the conference room. 3 countries were highlighted in red: Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. "The situation we're facing is more complex than your current intelligence suggests," I began. "You've been tracking arms movements, financial transactions, and communications intercepts. All of that data is accurate, but it's incomplete." I zoomed in on a specific region spanning the Syrian-Iraqi border. For the past 18 months, I've been living in this area under deep cover. I wasn't collecting intelligence from a distance. I was embedded within the networks you've been trying to penetrate from outside. Patricia Chen raised her hand hesitantly. "Ma'am, when you say embedded, do you mean—" I was living as one of them. False identity, false history, complete immersion. I worked in their supply chains, attended their planning meetings, broke bread with people who would have executed me immediately if they knew what I really was. The room absorbed this information. Gerald Foster, the veteran analyst who had tried to warn Webb earlier, spoke up. "Agent 1, most of us in this room have heard rumors about you, but we've never seen documentation. Your operations don't appear in any accessible database." Director Fisher answered for me. "Agent 1's files are classified above top secret. They're maintained in a separate system with access restricted to fewer than 20 people in the entire intelligence community. Most of what she's done will remain classified for at least 50 years. He looked at the room. "But you should understand who you're receiving this briefing from. Elena, may I?" I nodded. Fisher stood and walked to the front of the room. "Agent 1 has been operating for the CIA for 23 years. She's run successful deep cover operations in 14 countries. She's provided intelligence that prevented at least 6 major terrorist attacks on U.S. soil and dozens more on allied nations." He paused, letting that sink in. "She's lived under false identities for periods ranging from 6 months to 3 years. She's fluent in 9 languages. She's been arrested twice by hostile governments and extracted both times without compromising her cover or any other agents." Webb found his voice, though it was considerably more respectful now. "Sir, if I may ask, why is she called Agent 1? "Because she was the first," Fisher said simply. 23 years ago, the CIA initiated a program for ultra-deep cover operatives, agents who would disappear into hostile territories for years at a time, with no regular contact, no extraction plan, operating entirely on their own judgment and capability. He looked at me. Elena was the first person selected for the program. She was also the only one who survived the initial selection process. Since then, we've trained 37 other deep cover operatives. But she remains Agent 1, both as a designation and as recognition that she set the standard everyone else follows. Chen asked quietly, "What happened to the others who were selected initially?" 3 didn't complete training, Fisher said. 2 completed training, but failed their first field assignment and were reassigned. 1 was killed in the field. Elena succeeded when everyone else failed. I stood and took control of the briefing again. The reason I'm telling you this isn't to impress you. It's to establish credibility for what I'm about to say, because the intelligence I'm providing comes from first-hand observation, not analysis or intercepts. I pulled up a series of photographs on the screen. They showed various men in Middle Eastern settings, some in traditional dress, others in Western clothes. These are the key players in what's developing. You've identified some of them through your analytical work, but you're missing crucial connections because you're relying on external observation. I pointed to one photograph. This is Ahmed Al-Masri. Your files list him as a mid-level facilitator. In reality, he's the operational commander for the entire network. He keeps a low profile deliberately to avoid intelligence scrutiny. I pointed to another photo. This is Dr. Karim Haddad. You have him categorized as a legitimate businessman. He is a businessman, but he's also the primary money launderer for 3 terrorist organizations. I've personally watched him move millions of dollars through his legitimate enterprises. How do you know this? Webb asked, then quickly added, "Ma'am, because I worked in his office for 7 months as an accountant. I had direct access to his real financial records, not just the ones his legitimate businesses report." The room was silent. I continued through the photographs, providing details that no amount of external surveillance could have captured. Family relationships, personal rivalries, hidden alliances, financial arrangements, operational planning. After 15 minutes, Foster spoke up. "Agent 1, this intelligence is extraordinary. It answers questions we've had for years. But how do we verify it?" "You don't," I said bluntly. "You either trust my track record or you don't. But I'm not going to burn sources or reveal methodologies just to satisfy analytical skepticism." Fisher added, "For context, Agent 1's intelligence has been verified accurate 97% of the time over her career. When she provides information, we act on it." I moved to the next section of the briefing. Now, here's what's about to happen. In approximately 3 weeks, these networks are planning a coordinated series of attacks, not against Western targets, but against each other. That got everyone's attention. "What do you mean?" Chen asked. "I mean, there's a power struggle happening that your intercepts haven't detected because it's being conducted through intermediaries in coded language. 3 different factions are positioning for control of smuggling routes and financial networks. They're about to go to war with each other." Webb looked confused. "Why is that our concern? If they're fighting each other, doesn't that benefit us?" "No, Dr. Webb, it doesn't. Because when these groups fight, civilians die by the thousands. Refugee crises destabilize entire regions. Power vacuums emerge that are filled by even more extreme groups, and chaos creates opportunities for our enemies to operate with impunity." I pulled up casualty projections. If this conflict unfolds as I expect, we're looking at 10 to 15,000 civilian deaths in the first month, 500,000 displaced persons, and the collapse of what little stability exists in the region. The room absorbed these numbers with growing concern. "Can we prevent it?" Foster asked. "Yes," I said, "but only with a very specific intervention at a very specific moment. And it requires trusting my assessment completely." "What's the intervention?" Fisher asked. I pulled up a detailed operational plan I had been developing for months. We need to eliminate 3 specific individuals simultaneously, not the obvious leaders you've been tracking, the actual power brokers who are orchestrating this conflict from the shadows. I pointed to 3 photographs. These men, taken out within a 24-hour window. If we remove them, the planned conflict collapses because the middle management won't have clear direction. The factions will default to negotiation rather than war. Webb raised his hand. Ma'am, those aren't the men we've been targeting. Our intelligence suggests they're relatively minor players. Your intelligence is wrong, I said flatly. These 3 men control everything. The people you've been tracking are figureheads, decoys meant to draw attention while the real power operates invisibly. How do you know? Webb asked. Because I've sat in rooms with all 3 of them. I've listened to them plan operations. I've watched them give orders that moved hundreds of people and millions of dollars. I know exactly who they are and what they do. I let that sink in. And more importantly, I know where they'll be on November 23rd. All 3 of them, at a meeting in a compound outside Mosul. It's a rare opportunity. They almost never gather in the same location. Fisher leaned forward. What's your confidence level on this intelligence? 100%, sir. I was invited to that meeting. They think I'm a financial consultant helping them optimize their money laundering operations. The room erupted in whispers. You're still active in the network? Chen asked with disbelief. My cover remains intact, I confirmed. They have no idea who I really am, which means I can provide real-time intelligence on their movements and activities. Fisher stood. This is why I brought Agent 1 in for this briefing. She has access and intelligence that we simply cannot obtain through traditional methods. Her recommendation to target these 3 individuals is based on ground truth, not analysis. He looked around the room. I'm authorizing the operation she's proposed. JSOC will handle the tactical execution. Agent 1 will provide targeting information and real-time updates. Webb spoke up, his earlier arrogance completely gone. Sir, if I may, how do we know the cover won't be compromised? If we strike at targets she's identified, won't they suspect her? It's a risk, I acknowledged. But I've built in multiple layers of misdirection. When the strikes happen, I'll be in a different city with witnesses who can confirm I wasn't involved. The targeting information will appear to come from signals intelligence, not human sources. Foster asked the strategic question, and you believe eliminating these 3 individuals will prevent the conflict? I believe it will delay and disrupt it significantly. Give us time to implement diplomatic solutions, create space for local leaders to negotiate. It won't solve all the region's problems, but it will prevent the immediate catastrophe. Fisher nodded. Then we proceed. Agent 1 will coordinate with the operations team. This briefing is concluded, but all of you will remain on call for follow-up questions and analysis support. People began gathering their materials, but the atmosphere had completely changed from the beginning of the meeting. I noticed Webb lingering as others filed out. He approached hesitantly. Ma'am, I need to apologize. Not just for the coffee comment, but for my entire attitude. I was arrogant and dismissive. I made assumptions without basis. Yes, you did, I agreed. Is there anything I can do to make up for that? I considered him carefully. He was young, talented, but dangerously overconfident. The kind of analyst who could either become exceptional or become a liability. Dr. Webb, I'm going to tell you something I wish someone had told me when I was your age. Intelligence work isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being the most observant, the most humble, and the most willing to question your own assumptions. He nodded, listening carefully. You have analytical skills. That's clear from your work. But you need to develop human skills, the ability to read people, to understand motivations, to see beneath surface appearances. How do I develop those skills? By remembering this morning. By remembering that you ordered the most experienced operative in the CIA to fetch you coffee because you couldn't be bothered to look at her carefully enough to realize who she was. I picked up my folder. That moment of carelessness, replicated in the field, gets people killed. Remember it. Learn from it. Become better because of it. I will, ma'am. Thank you. As I walked toward the door, Fisher joined me. That was masterfully done, Elena. You turned a moment of disrespect into a teaching opportunity. That analyst has potential, I said. He just needed to learn humility. Most people never learn it. You did him a favor. We walked into the hallway, leaving behind a room full of analysts who were beginning to understand that the most important intelligence often comes from sources they never see and would never recognize, because Agent 1 had spent 23 years being invisible, and that invisibility was the greatest operational advantage any intelligence officer could have. 3 days after the headquarters briefing, I sat in a secure operations center 3 floors below the main CIA building. The room was filled with monitors showing real-time satellite feeds, drone footage, and communications intercepts from the Middle East. Director Fisher was present, along with the JSOC commander who would be executing the strike, a 2-star general named Bradley Morrison. Also present were key analysts from the briefing, including Webb, Chen, and Foster. Agent 1, General Morrison said, walking me through the tactical display. We have assets positioned in 3 locations. Delta operators here, here, and here. He pointed to positions on the map surrounding the compound outside Mosul. I studied the positioning carefully. You're too close, I said. Pull your teams back another 2 kilometers. Morrison frowned. At that distance, response time increases significantly if something goes wrong. Nothing will go wrong if they don't know you're coming. But if your teams are detected at current positions, the targets will scatter, and we lose the opportunity. Morrison looked at Fisher, who nodded. Pull them back, Fisher said. Agent 1's assessment takes priority. Morrison relayed the orders through his communications officer. I turned my attention to the timeline displayed on the main screen. The meeting is scheduled to begin at 1400 local time. All 3 targets should be in the compound by 1345. That's your window. What's your confidence they'll actually attend? Chen asked from her analyst station. I received confirmation this morning, I said. I'm supposed to be there too, but I sent word that I was delayed in Beirut handling a banking issue. They accepted the explanation without question. Webb spoke up from his workstation. Ma'am, I've been analyzing the compound's security. They have at least 12 armed guards, sophisticated surveillance systems, and reinforced structures. Even with element of surprise, this is a hard target. I've been in that compound 6 times, I said. I know every guard rotation, every camera blind spot, every structural weakness. The intelligence package I provided to JSOC accounts for all of it. Morrison confirmed. Agent 1's intelligence has been invaluable. We've identified approach routes and breach points that our own reconnaissance missed. The clock showed 13:15 local time, 45 minutes until the operation. I pulled up communications intercepts on one of the monitors. These are the latest phone calls from the targets. I listened to each one through the translation system. All 3 confirm they're en route to the meeting. No indication of concern or suspicion. Foster asked, "What happens after the strike? Won't the network immediately suspect there was intelligence from inside?" That's where the cover story comes in, I explained. We've prepared false signals intelligence suggesting the meeting was detected through phone intercepts. We've also planted evidence, suggesting a rival faction tipped off Western intelligence to eliminate competition. Smart, Foster said. Multiple layers of misdirection. I learned from the best, I replied, glancing at Fisher, who had taught me many of these techniques 2 decades ago. The operations center settled into focused tension as the timeline counted down. At 1340, the first target vehicle appeared on the drone feed. Target 1 arriving, the imagery analyst called out. Ahmed al-Masri and 3 security personnel, entering compound now. 3 minutes later, target 2 arrived. At 1348, the third and final target appeared. All targets in compound, Morrison confirmed. JSOC teams, stand by for execute order. I watched the drone feed carefully, counting people, identifying vehicles, assessing any anomalies. "Something's wrong," I said suddenly. Everyone looked at me. "What?" Morrison asked sharply. "There should be 12 guards. I'm counting 15. 3 additional security personnel that weren't scheduled. Are they armed?" Fisher asked. I enhanced the image. "Yes. And they're positioned differently than normal. More alert, more tactical." Webb pulled up his analysis. "Could they have been tipped off?" "No," I said, thinking quickly. "If they'd been tipped off, the targets wouldn't have come at all. This is something else. Possibly increased security because all 3 principals are meeting. They're being cautious. Does it change the operation?" Fisher asked Morrison. Morrison consulted with his tactical team through his headset. "My teams can adjust. 3 additional hostiles don't significantly change the tactical calculus. We still have overwhelming advantage." I studied the feed for another 30 seconds. "Proceed," I said. "But tell your teams about the additional security. I don't want any surprises." Morrison relayed the update. At 13:55, all 3 targets were confirmed inside the main meeting room. "This is it," Fisher said quietly. Morrison spoke into his headset. "All teams, this is command. You are cleared hot. I repeat, cleared hot. Execute on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." On the drone feed, I watched the operation unfold with surgical precision. Delta operators approached from 3 directions simultaneously, moving through the blind spots I had identified. Snipers took out perimeter guards silently. Breaching teams hit doors with explosive charges. The entire compound erupted in coordinated chaos. "Room cleared," Team 1 reported. "Target 1 confirmed down." "Target 2 down," Team 2 called. Team 3 reporting Target 3 neutralized. Compound secure. From the moment the breach began to final, confirmation took 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Morrison allowed himself a slight smile. "Clean operation, no friendly casualties. All objectives achieved." I watched the after-action footage as teams secured the compound and confirmed the identities of the 3 targets. Webb was monitoring communications intercepts. "Ma'am, we're picking up emergency calls from the network." They're confused, panicked. No indication they suspect internal compromise. They think it was an American drone strike based on signals intelligence. "Good," I said. "That's exactly what we want them to believe." Fisher turned to me. "Elena, your positioning and intelligence made that operation possible. Those men would have continued operating for years if you hadn't identified them and provided access. I just provided information, sir. JSOC executed perfectly." "Don't be modest," Morrison said. "That was some of the best target intelligence I've worked with in 30 years. Your assessment of security, timing, and vulnerability was flawless." I nodded, accepting the compliment. "What's the next phase?" Chen asked. "Now we wait," I said. "The network will scramble to fill the leadership vacuum. That process will take weeks, maybe months. During that time, they'll be disorganized, vulnerable. That's when diplomatic and law enforcement efforts can make real progress." Foster pulled up projections. Based on Agent 1's assessment, we're estimating the planned conflict is now delayed by at least 6 months, possibly permanently disrupted. "That was the goal," Fisher said. "Not just eliminating targets, but preventing a catastrophe." Webb spoke up hesitantly. "Ma'am, can I ask what happens to your cover now?" "I maintain it," I said. "I'll return to the region in 3 days, express shock and concern about the attack, offer to help the network rebuild their financial operations, continue gathering intelligence." "You're going back?" Webb asked with disbelief. "After what just happened?" "This is what I do, Dr. Webb. I don't operate from comfortable distance. I live in the environment, become part of it, and provide intelligence that can't be obtained any other way." "Isn't that incredibly dangerous?" Chen asked. "Every day," I agreed, "but it's also incredibly effective." Fisher checked his watch. "Elena, you have 72 hours before you need to be back in theater. Use that time to rest. You've earned it." "I'll spend it reviewing intelligence updates and preparing for my return," I said. "Of course you will," Fisher said with a slight smile. "You've never been good at resting." The Operations Center began the process of documenting the mission, archiving footage, preparing reports that would be seen by only a handful of people in the entire government. As the room started to clear, Webb approached me one more time. "Ma'am, I've been thinking about what you said, about assumptions and observation." "Good. Keep thinking about it. I've been reviewing your career, what little I can access, the operations you've run, the intelligence you've provided. It's remarkable." "The operations that succeeded are remarkable," I corrected. "The ones that failed taught me more valuable lessons. Can I ask how many operations have failed?" "Enough to keep me humble," I said, "and to remind me that no amount of preparation guarantees success. You can do everything right and still have things go wrong. How do you handle that?" "The pressure, the risk, the constant danger. By remembering why I do this. Every operation I run, every piece of intelligence I gather, every target I help eliminate saves lives. American lives, Allied lives, civilian lives. That purpose keeps me going when everything else says to quit." Webb nodded slowly. "Thank you, ma'am, for the lesson and for your service. Thank you for being willing to learn." As he walked away, Foster approached. "You made an impression on that young man," he said. "He has potential. He just needed perspective. Not many people would turn a moment of disrespect into a teaching opportunity." I shrugged. "Anger is wasted energy. Teaching serves a purpose. That's what makes you Agent 1, Foster said. "Not just the operational success, but the wisdom to use every moment productively." I picked up my secure tablet and headed for the exit. Director Fisher caught me at the door. "Elena, before you go, I want you to know that the President has been briefed on this operation. He asked me to convey his personal thanks." "I appreciate that, sir. He also asked if you'd be willing to brief the National Security Council when you return from the field." "On what topic?" "On the future of human intelligence in an era of technological surveillance. On why deep cover operatives like you remain essential despite all our advanced capabilities. I'll consider it." "That's not a no," Fisher noted with satisfaction. "That's because I'm tired and being diplomatic," I said. "The real answer is that I don't do public speaking, even to classified audiences. I operate best when nobody knows who I am or what I do. The NSC wouldn't be public. It would be 12 people in a secure room. 12 people is 11 people too many," I replied. Fisher smiled. "I'll tell the President you'll think about it." "You do that." I left the operations center and made my way to the parking garage. My rental car was anonymous, untraceable, like everything else in my life. As I drove away from Langley, I thought about the operation we had just completed. 3 targets eliminated, a regional conflict prevented, thousands of lives saved. In 3 days, I would return to the Middle East, return to my false identity, my cover story, my life of sustained deception. Most people couldn't live the way I did, couldn't maintain multiple identities, couldn't operate for months without revealing their true self, couldn't endure the constant stress of knowing that one mistake meant capture, torture, and death. But I wasn't most people. I was Agent 1. And somewhere in the Middle East, people who thought they were safe, who thought they were invisible, would soon discover that someone was watching. Someone who looked like an accountant or a consultant or an assistant. Someone who sat in corners and was asked to fetch coffee. Someone who was always underestimated until it was too late. The most dangerous intelligence officer in the world didn't look dangerous. That was the whole point. 72 hours after the successful operation in Mosul, I stood in my small apartment in Arlington, Virginia, packing for my return to the Middle East. The apartment was sparse, impersonal. No photographs on the walls, no mementos, nothing that indicated who actually lived here. This was one of 7 residences I maintained in different cities. None of them felt like home. Home was a concept I had abandoned 23 years ago when I became Agent 1. My phone buzzed with a secure message from Director Fisher. "Need to see you before you deploy. My office, 1400 hours." I arrived at Langley at 13:45 and was escorted directly to the director's 7th floor office. Fisher was waiting with 2 other people I recognized immediately. The first was Samantha Rhodes, Deputy Director for Operations. The second was Marcus Webb, the young analyst from the briefing. "Elena," Fisher said, gesturing to a chair. "Thank you for coming." "What's this about?" I asked, sitting down. Fisher leaned back in his chair. "The operation 3 days ago was a complete success, but it also exposed something we need to address." "What?" Rhodes spoke up. "Agent 1, your effectiveness is undeniable, but you're also a single point of failure. If something happens to you, we lose 23 years of expertise, methodology, and field networks that can't be easily replaced. I'm aware of the risk." "We need to start training your replacement," Fisher said. "Not because we're pushing you out, but because we need continuity. You won't operate forever. I have no intention of retiring." "I know," Fisher said with a slight smile, "but eventually circumstances will make that decision for you. Age, injury, or simple probability. You've survived situations that should have killed you a dozen times. That luck won't hold indefinitely. What are you proposing?" Rhodes pulled out a file. "We want to assign you a protege, someone you'll mentor, train, and eventually transition your networks to. Someone who can learn from your methods before they're lost. I don't work with partners." "This wouldn't be a partner," Fisher clarified. "This would be someone you train during the intervals between deep cover operations. Teach them your techniques, your assessment methods, your operational philosophy. Who did you have in mind?" Rhodes opened the file and showed me a photograph. Her name is Sarah Mendez, 28 years old, Army intelligence background, fluent in 4 languages, top scores in every assessment we've given her. And most importantly, she has the psychological profile for deep cover work. I studied the file carefully. Mendez's record was impressive, but records only told part of the story. "I'll meet with her," I said, "but I make no promises. Most people can't do what we do." "We understand," Rhodes said. "The meeting is scheduled for tomorrow before you deploy." "Fine." Fisher shifted topics. "There's another matter. Dr. Webb has been working on something since the briefing. I think you should hear it." Webb stood, looking nervous but determined. "Ma'am, after the operation, I started analyzing the intelligence you've provided over your career. What I could access anyway. Which isn't much," I noted. "True. But what I could access showed patterns. Your intelligence has prevented 6 major terrorist attacks that we know of publicly. But when I looked at other prevented attacks that weren't publicized, I found your fingerprints on at least 23 more." I said nothing. Webb continued. "You've provided intelligence that led to the arrest of over 300 terrorists and criminal actors. You've disrupted financing networks that funded dozens of operations. And you've saved an estimated 12,000 lives over your career." "Those are estimates," I said. "You can't quantify impact precisely." "Maybe not precisely," Webb agreed. "But conservatively, your work has prevented more casualties than any single intelligence officer in CIA history." Fisher added, "Which is why we're recommending you for the Intelligence Star. It's long overdue." "I've been recommended before," I said. "I declined then, and I'm declining now." "Why?" Rhodes asked. "Because recognition compromises operational security. The moment my name appears on any public or semi-public record, even a classified one, I become less effective. Anonymity is my greatest asset." "The Intelligence Star ceremony is completely classified," Fisher said. "But it creates a paper trail, creates connections between my identity and my operations. I prefer to remain a ghost." Fisher sighed, clearly having expected this response. "At least, let us brief the president personally. He should know what you've accomplished. The president already knows I exist. That's sufficient." Webb spoke up again hesitantly. "Ma'am, if I may, I've been thinking about what you said at the briefing, about assumptions and observation. I've been trying to apply it to my analytical work. How's that going?" "Better. I caught 3 intelligence gaps this week that I would have missed before. Small things, but potentially significant. Places where we were making assumptions without verifying. Good. Keep doing that. I wanted to thank you, Webb said, for not ending my career when you could have, for teaching me instead of destroying me. Dr. Webb, if I'd wanted to end your career, I would have. But you have talent. You just needed to learn humility and observation. You're learning. That's what matters. Rhodes checked her watch. Agent 1, you deploy tomorrow evening. Is there anything you need for your return to theater? My network is intact. My cover is solid. I'm ready. Fisher stood and extended his hand. Stay safe, Elena, and consider the protege assignment. We really do need to ensure your expertise survives beyond your active service. I'll meet with Mendez. We'll see if she has what it takes. I left Fisher's office and made my way to the parking garage. As I reached my car, I heard footsteps behind me. Ma'am, wait. I turned to see Webb, jogging after me. Dr. Webb. Something else? He stopped, slightly out of breath. I just wanted to say, what you do, who you are. It changed my understanding of intelligence work. I thought it was about analysis, about being smart. You showed me it's about so much more. It's about people, I said. Understanding them, reading them, anticipating them. Technology provides data, but people provide context. I hope someday I can be half as effective as you are. I looked at him carefully. He was sincere, humble in a way he hadn't been a week ago. Dr. Webb, you asked me to fetch coffee and I didn't get angry. Do you know why? Because you're professional? Because I understood you were young, arrogant, and didn't know any better. I saw potential beneath the arrogance. That's observation and assessment applied to everyday situations, not just field operations. He nodded slowly. Every interaction is intelligence gathering. Exactly. Remember that and you'll become exceptional at what you do. I got in my car and drove away, leaving Webb standing in the parking garage processing the lesson. The next morning, I met Sarah Mendez in a secure facility outside the city. She was exactly as her file described. Young, sharp, physically fit, with the kind of intensity that suggested deep reserves of determination. We sat across from each other in a plain conference room. Ms. Mendez, I began, you've been told why you're here? Yes, ma'am. Director Rhodes said you might consider taking me on as a protege, might being the operative word. Most people can't do what I do. The psychological cost is too high. I understand it's difficult, ma'am. No, you don't, I said bluntly. You think you do, but you don't. Living under false identity for months or years, never being yourself, always performing, constantly aware that one mistake means death. It's not difficult. It's soul-destroying. She met my eyes without flinching. Then why do you do it? Because someone has to. Because the intelligence I gather saves lives. Because I'm good at it, and there aren't many people who are. I want to be one of those people, she said. Why? Because I've seen what terrorism does. I lost family in the 9/11 attacks. I joined the military to make a difference. But I realized that the real fight happens in shadows, not battlefields. I studied her carefully, reading body language, assessing sincerity. If I agree to train you, you'll spend the next year learning techniques I've developed over 2 decades. You'll learn languages, cultural adaptation, identity construction, behavioral deception. You'll learn how to become someone else so completely that you forget who you really are. I'm ready. Maybe you are, I said. Or maybe you'll wash out like most candidates do. We'll find out. When do we start? After I return from my current operation, 6 to 8 weeks. In the meantime, study the materials Rhodes will provide. Focus especially on Middle Eastern cultural practices and social dynamics. Yes, ma'am. 1. More thing, I said, standing. If you can't handle being asked to fetch coffee without getting angry, you can't handle deep cover operations. Understand? She looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned. You're testing to see if I know the story. Everyone knows the story by now, I said. It's become a teaching example. The point is, can you handle being dismissed, disrespected, treated as invisible and irrelevant? Yes, ma'am. Whatever the mission requires. We'll see. That evening, I boarded a commercial flight to Istanbul, the first leg of my journey back to my cover identity in the Middle East. As the plane climbed into the darkening sky, I thought about the week's events. An operation successfully completed, 3 high-value targets eliminated, a potential regional conflict prevented, and now, possibly, a successor being trained to continue the work when I could no longer do it. 23 years as Agent 1 had taught me many things, but perhaps the most important lesson was that the work was bigger than any individual. Networks needed to survive beyond single operators. Knowledge needed to be transferred to the next generation. Maybe it was time to start thinking about legacy instead of just the next operation. My phone buzzed with a final message from Fisher. "Safe travels, Elena. The world is better because of what you do, even if most people will never know it." I put the phone away and closed my eyes. Somewhere in the Middle East, people who thought they were safe would soon discover that the accountant they trusted, the consultant they relied on, the quiet woman in the corner they barely noticed, was something very different. They would discover too late that Agent 1 was always watching, always gathering intelligence, always invisible until the moment she needed to be seen. 2 months later, back in my office at Langley after completing my Middle Eastern operation, I received an email from Marcus Webb. "Ma'am, I've been promoted to Deputy Section Chief. During my interview, I was asked what moment in my career taught me the most important lesson. I told them about the day I asked Agent 1 to fetch coffee. They said it was the best answer they'd heard. Thank you for teaching me what truly matters. Respectfully, Marcus Webb." I saved the email in a folder I kept for moments like this. Reminders that the work we did, the lessons we taught, the examples we set, they rippled outward in ways we couldn't always measure. Sarah Mendez had begun her training and was exceeding expectations. In a year, maybe 2, she would be ready for her first deep cover operation. The legacy of Agent 1 would continue. I looked at my reflection in the dark computer screen. A woman in her late 40s who looked like a bureaucrat or an analyst. Someone you wouldn't notice in a crowd. Someone who could be asked to fetch coffee without anyone thinking twice. Perfect. Because the most dangerous intelligence officer in the world didn't need to look dangerous. She just needed to be invisible. And after 23 years, I had become very, very good at being invisible. Agent 1 would continue operating in the shadows, gathering intelligence that saved lives, preventing catastrophes that most people would never know existed, exactly as it should be.